Belated call to order of the April 2023 meeting of the Homewood Planning Commission. If we could please start with a roll call.
All right. Mr. Henninger. Here. Ms. Wilcutt. Mr. Harwell. Here. Mr. Respento. Mr. Armstead. Mr. Broadhead. Ms. Andress.
Here.
Mr. Cronteras. Here. And Mr. Roberts.
Here. All right, thank you. Next on the agenda, we have a couple sets of minutes from the January and March meetings. Fred circulated those before. Does anyone have any concerns or questions about the meetings? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve both sets.
Move to approve both sets.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved. Communications from the chair, I have none. Mr. Winslow, Mr. Armstead rather, is not here today, so we'll skip on. There's no old business. We have one new piece of business tonight. It is case AD 23-04-01, an amended development plan at 914 Oak Grove Road. Applicant is David Siegel. It's Twin Construction. If you come forward and state your case, please.
Good evening. We are wanting to build a metal storage building in between two existing storage buildings over on Oak Grove for additional outreach. And I don't know if I should address, I think there's some concern on the landscape buffer as we have it drawn on the plan. If you want me to address that, we are willing to proffer tonight that we landscape that entire property line because I think that's going to be the easiest way for us to get the permit. And then we will potentially go to try and get a zoning variance to reduce the amount of landscaping on that property line. And I understand from Kale a few minutes ago, that would then trigger us to come back to y'all to amend the drawing.
Anything?
And David Thompson's here. He's the executive pastor, and he's just
answer any questions that you have.
Okay. And would you sign in so we'll get your name correct and all that?
All right, thank you, Fred. Yeah, I forgot that again.
Oh, here it is.
Yeah, it should be the sign-up sheet right there.
Probably should use that.
So, as I understood, you're proffering to install a landscape buffer in accordance with the zoning ordinance requirements, but your intent is to go before the Zoning Board of Adjustment to get a modified buffering approved by them, a variance to allow less than what's required by the zoning ordinance.
Correct.
And then,
But we recognize if that does not pass, or that if we do not get, that approved, that we will still be required to put the buffer down the entire property line. It's just the back, I don't know if anybody's been over there, but this entire back area, it's just an open field.
Right.
There's really nothing there.
Right.
And then I would say also, in addition, this front area, there's at least 20, 30 feet that I think might encroach some sightline issues, as you're driving around that corner. So our hope is that we'll, landscape in front of this building, and we'll probably add, with that zoning request, we'll probably add landscaping behind the current Christian Life Center building that's been there since early 90s, but it would probably look nice if there was some additional landscape buffer there.
Okay. All right, if there's nothing else, we're going to open up the public portion. Then we'll reserve questions until after that. As I mentioned just a moment ago, this is a public hearing. Anyone here to speak on this case, you can come forward now, and if you do, please sign in your name and address and also state it for the record.
Hey, I'm Diane Lee, and I live at 108, which is right behind that building. And my main concern is just maybe with some of the landscaping, if there could be a little bit more of a drainage, address that, because like from the Christian Life Center, it is dumping a lot of water on the house next to me, the 104, that they've advised me of that. And just cleaning up the fence, they would do that if they did the landscaping. But you can see the ditch is very minute. There's not much drainage there at all. And it sits a little bit higher, so the water comes down into our backyards. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you, thank you. And we'll address that, we'll question the applicant
Okay.
about that in a moment.
That was my only concern.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Lee.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the public who would like to speak on this case? All right, seeing no one, we will close the public portion and we'll ask you to step up and answer any questions that the members of the commission have. I'm going to start, and Ms. Leach mentioned the drainage ditch, and we've seen photos of that kind of behind where the new building would go. My question is, and not knowing how close that is to where you would have to build, or I'm sorry, put in the landscape buffer, would putting in the landscape buffer there affect the drainage issues or affect that ditch in any way?
I mean, I don't believe it would. We'll be planning in that ditch, but I will say that the building footprint, I think's, what is it, 75 by 40, I think? That footprint, the entire building will have a gutter on it, and the gutter will be draining out to the opposite side towards the parking lot. So we should be capturing much more water than, what's currently going to that ditch. We also have EDG provided us a no adverse impact letter, so we don't believe we're going to be adversely impacting anything as far as stormwater is concerned.
Do the buildings, I guess the Christian Life Center, is it guttered, or does it have gutters? I couldn't tell from the photos. But
It does.
I believe
Okay.
it does.
Yes, sir. It does.
do you know where those drain?
The front.
Front, okay.
What is the required landscape buffer? Is this required for that?
It's just a residential, right? I just want to clarify, because you mentioned I thought you were mentioning maybe Oak Grove. It's just the buffer for the residents, which is the back part of the property, and then the property adjacent to where Ms. Lee lives, right? I mean, it's
Yeah,
not a
that-
long stretch, but it's just these two angles right here, right?
Yeah, I think that the area of greatest concern would be from the building built in 2018 eastward to Oak Grove Road. That is where the residents are seeing these buildings, and any drainage coming from them might be impacted more there than, as you say, the field to the west is not of that much concern visually or drainage wise,
But I think it's my understanding this entire south property line, per the ordinance, wouldn't,
that,
Issue all of a sudden,
that is
doing
correct.
this, you gotta create a buffer.
That's,
it's not my understanding that lower, it's my understanding that run, that is correct. That's my understanding.
Just the improved
That's,
Here.
that's
Yeah.
my understanding.
that would be the requirement.
2018, I'm not quite sure why the planning commission didn't require
Yeah, but I
that they
think
put it there.
That is adjacent residential. That's what I'm saying. I mean, that's what they're gonna have to ask the variance for. I mean, okay, so the way I'm understanding it is that this is also residential, so by coming in compliance, you're gonna also have to buffer the residents that are in the back of the property. I know that's across from a field, and I would, I can't speak for the
Is
BZA,
that,
but
let me look through
I'm not
that.
sure if it matters, there's an existing drainage ditch there, like for the neighborhood. on
No,
the
I'm not
backside.
asking about that. I'm asking about coming into compliance with what the zoning
Well,
is.
that would probably be cost prohibitive for us to start without getting the zoning variance.
That's what I'm saying, so that, okay.
But is
am I-
that, I'm trying to pull up that ordinance, because that's not the way I read it. I'm very likely wrong, but,
Well, and that's what you would go to BZA about, right? And so,
Yeah, it seems so somewhat onerous for a 16-foot building to have to put.
street,
right, but if they
The
go
key
into
word would be
compliance
a
with the
buffer
ordinance.
strip along said property line or district bounds, we're referring to the entire
Yeah.
district. So, yeah, technically, it
But I
would
would
be
say-
along the south and the west, but I agree, we all
And now
agree
we're
that
on
that's
proposal
excessive.
number 3
That's
that's being
why-
added to this lot without appropriate landscape buffering along the residential property line.
It looks like,
What's a landscape buffer? Define.
It's highlighted on that sheet that gives you the definition of what a landscape buffer is.
yeah, it only applies where there's, where, according to the ordinance, where it's adjacent to an existing residence or residential district. And I don't know how close it has to be, what adjacent means.
But,
But
well,
like-
adjacent, and that would include the south and the western boundaries of the church property. technically.
So what
But
constitutes a
why would
buffer?
it say adjacent? Why wouldn't it just say all property lines?
Because that's residential right there, right? So
Well,
that's-
all property lines between
Along
industrial and
said property
residential.
line or
It does
district
use the word
boundary.
adjacent, which to me makes it seem like it'd be the south property line and not all property lines
Right.
between industrial.
Well, that,
I mean, it's one of those things that's easier for y'all to just subdivide the thing,
Easier for us to what?
just subdivide it, and then all of a sudden,
Yeah.
this little building gets a landscape buffer. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
at least that's how I'm looking at it.
It's subdivided, but they still have to change the zoning, because it still would be an institutional.
Yeah, but you wouldn't,
Zone.
you just subdivide that.
Our property would
I see what you're saying.
Do the whole thing.
I see what you're saying.
You're just doing that one line and calling it a day.
I'm just trying to figure out how to get them in compliance, so the easiest way to do that, and as I'm reading as I'm understanding it, to get in compliance with the original zoning, it's all residential, not anything, not the other two
What's on this
boundaries.
property line?
And I know I recognize that's not part of what we're looking at tonight, because we're on a completely different part of the property, but to get the complete in compliance, right?
But it's legal non-conforming as it currently exists, right? Or no?
No, it's
just
not.
non-conforming.
And
So when
that's
was
my
it zoned
point.
in- When was it zoned into institution?
I don't
It
know.
was probably when they first started
But when
with the zones.
when the last building was added in 2018,
Right?
the planning commission did not require that they add the landscaping or that they request a variance from the Board of Zoning Adjustment. The planning commission waived the requirement, and the planning commission doesn't have that power.
With the exception of the immediate building in question, 2018, and you can see the landscaping that was installed, but the requirements of the zoning ordinance would be that it would be along the entire length of the boundary adjacent to those residential properties. But the planning commission did not have authority to just approve a limited landscaping plan. They would have to either comply and install the complete landscape buffer or get a variance from the zoning board of adjustment to do less than that.
But I understand the proffer you've made is to have the landscaping buffer consistent with what the code requires. Whatever that is, and the
Well,
city would.
but I would like to clarify, I was under the impression we were just talking about the south property line, because we're probably talking over $100,000 to do this buffer on both property lines, and, I mean, we've got a steel building sitting in the parking lot
Yeah.
that I want to build, but, I mean, I
But you
can't
could-
spend the church's money like that. I can't in good faith. We wouldn't move forward likely with the project until we potentially got the zoning approved. So I appreciate your point, is if we're going to get zoning approval, let's make sure we get the right approval.
That's correct, and I'm not trying to add.
No, I understand
Right.
where you're coming from
Yeah.
completely. It's been a frustrating experience for us, but we're here, you know.
So, but they can go to the BZA. I mean, that's right? So that's what I would do, is go to the BZA and ask for that variance.
Yeah, and I guess if we had known about this before last week, we would have applied for that, so. But-
But you can still go to the May building, the May.
I'd have to go back and look at the
BZA?
calendar. I don't know.
Okay,
Hopefully.
You can get on the May.
Okay,
yeah.
Yeah, I think the deadline's the 13th.
okay.
So you would have to
Make it work.
go to BZA first and then come back to us for some. Is that?
Is there a way that we could request something, and I'm trying to think creatively here, that would get approved tonight so that if we got the variance, that we could go ahead and get permitted and start construction prior to getting an additional approval from y'all? For example, and maybe to that point, maybe we do proffer that we'll do, for today's meeting, that we'll proffer that we'll do what would this be, the west and the south property line, knowing that we won't actually start construction, but at least we have y'all's approval. I don't know if there's a creative way to do that. We've just been trying to permit this since January, and we're ready to do some more outreach.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
I hate for you to agree to something that you're
Uh,
not planning to do. and then it'd be hard to-
I understand that. I would say, if we could word something. I'm just trying to be creative.
If we agree to it and it passes, and then you don't get the variance, then you just don't pull a permit.
Right.
Right.
And then you
Right,
start
yeah.
over. I mean, I don't see a downside to.
If we don't get the variance, I don't think it's possible for us to.
I don't think
Right,
it's
no, I
feasible.
get
What
that.
I don't wanna do is force another issue that you've approved.
Understood. So I don't have a solution. I was just throwing out a
Yeah.
creative problem.
Somebody screwed up
Right.
previously.
The-
Yeah, our limitation is, as a body, we can't approve something that doesn't comply with the code.
Absolutely.
The variance, is-
Right.
you know that.
And that's why I was trying to throw out the south, and so I guess we could throw out 2 property lines, knowing that we wouldn't actually pull a permit and start construction
Right.
unless we got the zoning
Yeah.
approval.
I would think that the planning commission could consider approval of the project subject to the applicant complying with the zoning ordinance with respect to the buffer, which would mean the south and west, that it's approved subject to you either submitting an acceptable landscape plan consistent with the zoning ordinance or obtaining a variance from the zoning board of adjustment that would you either waive that requirement or approve a modified landscape plan that would be acceptable to the board. That, again, no building permit could be issued until that variance was approved and the appropriate landscape plan submitted for review by city staff to make sure it complies. But that,
BZA next to BZA.
That's the May
May
6th.
2nd, and then we would be when?
no,
No, we meet again before, BZA is next Thursday,
they
but then we would
meet-
meet again next month before
No,
the
it'd be
BZA
after.
can hear their
Yeah,
case.
it's usually before this one.
So, yeah, so BZA meets before us, right?
Well, they meet
Yeah.
Thursday, but
No.
the next month, we're gonna meet before BZA. By the time they could get before BZA, we'll have one more meeting.
The issue, actually, I'm not sure it needs to come back to the planning commission, that your approval is for the installation, compliance with the zoning ordinance and installation of that landscape plan, or obtaining a variance from the zoning board of adjustment. The zoning, and so that's the planning commission's role, and that's consistent with the zoning ordinance. The BZA would then have to review the merits of what level of landscaping needs to be installed, at the length of it and where that would be. If they approve something, a modified version, given the length of that whole boundary, that plan, they would approve that variance, and you would have to submit a landscape plan in accord with the zoning ordinance for that limited, and the city staff would review that to make sure it's in compliance. And if it is, then it would be go forward, and then you get that building permit. I don't think it actually has to come back to the planning commission. You've given that responsibility for, if he doesn't submit something, then he's got to get that variance, and then the BZA would determine what level of the buffering would be installed. And city staff would confirm that it meets the requirements of the zoning ordinance, the width and the composition of the buffer. So I don't think it actually has to come back to the planning commission.
I wouldn't think so either.
No, you would be approving it subject to those conditions. Now, the issue of drainage, that's something, if that's something that the planning commission wants to address or have the city work to see if that swell is not effective, I don't know. But it is interesting that you're capturing the water through the gutters. But somehow, according to the speaker, there's the experience at some level of water runoff from the property onto their residential property, so I don't know how that's gonna be handled.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they provided a letter from an engineer.
Right.
And so it's not a municipal issue at this point.
Okay.
But certainly, if we see some downspouts or something that we can route differently, we're more than willing to do that.
Absolutely.
So Stuart, what is the motion?
So, I mean, the motion, as I understand it, the motion would be to approve the case subject or subject to the applicant providing a landscape plan that complies with the code, or if the
Obtain a variance.
BZA approves a different.
A
Yeah, it
variance.
provides
So
a
the
variance.
BZA would then determine whether a full one needs to be installed or something less than that. So,
I'm
yeah.
happy to make that motion. Are you ready for that?
Yep.
That's my motion.
That's what y'all want.
Well, can I ask one clarifying question?
Sure.
Because I don't want to speak on behalf of the entire church or the committee that's involved with this. If the committee, based on how y'all are, this conditional approval that y'all are talking about approving or possibly approving, if the church was willing to go forward and pull a permit, knowing that they may have to landscape the entire back property line and south property, well, the two property lines that we're talking about, would we be willing, or would we be able to go ahead and pull a permit and start construction? I personally don't think the church is gonna wanna move in that direction until we get, hopefully, approval from the zoning, but just so I have all the information to go back to the church with.
Yeah, that's the motion, is to
Okay.
either be in.
That's how I
compliance
understand
or-
it. I just
okay.
wanted to make sure I was
That's
on the
what my
same
motion
page.
is. Correct, yeah.
So we have a motion.
Ms. Andrus made the motion, and Mr.
Contreras.
Contreras seconded. And just for clarification, that motion is to approve the amended development plan, subject to the applicant submitting an acceptable landscape plan in accord with the requirements of the city zoning ordinance or obtaining a variance from the zoning board of adjustment.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Okay, all right. Mr. Harwell,
Yes.
Mr. Henninger,
Yes.
Ms. Andrus,
Yes.
Mr. Cronteras, and Mr. Roberts.
Yes, so your case passes, subject to the
Thank you very
stipulations.
much.
Thanks for your time.
Okay.
Okay, all right, moving on, our next item is communications from the staff. Do you have any communications?
No.
Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Okay.
All in favor?
All in favor?
All opposed? All right, we are adjourned.
Easy one. Relatively.